rather than thinking in economic terms. We have to think in economic terms. But our problems have started a long time ago, at least subtly, all the way back to 1913 with the beginning of the destruction of the currency. But a major change occurred 40 years ago, 1971, when unlimited credit became the policy of this country, which meant that it would accommodate unlimited spending. So the most current crisis that we face now has been building since 1971. Now, the beginning of that correction actually occurred in the year 2000, and the market finally had been exhausted, and it couldn't be propped up by just printing money and spending money, running up debt, and just trying to regulate the problems that they've created. So in the year 2000, we had the NASDAQ bubble collapse because the NASDAQ was way out of control. There was way too much speculation because of the excessive credit. But it was papered over because then again the monetary authorities decided that there would be a housing bubble to replace the NASDAQ bubble. And that seemed to work, but the truth is the standard of living and real jobs have been going down ever since the year 2000. We've had a 30 million increase in population since the year 2000, and essentially no new manufacturing and productive jobs. And we've been consuming wealth during this period of time. So although it's very easy to look at the housing crisis in Nevada, and in particular Las Vegas, and say that is the issue, all we have to do is wave a wand, give somebody some money, and solve the housing trouble. It isn't the answer. You have to answer the question where the bubble came from. And we have to talk to those individuals who understood the bubble, predicted the bubble, and explained that it was coming. But essentially, bubbles are formed by excessive credit. In a free market, credit and capital should come from savings. But we haven't done that for decades. They had this fictitious belief that if you didn't save, it didn't matter, because all we had to do is create new money out of thin air and pass it out to the special interest, and it would dribble down and help the middle class. What didn't help the middle class, it destroyed jobs, it has shrunk the middle class, and now the middle class and the poor are suffering. And all those programs that were designed for houses, the people have lost their houses. But it cannot exist without the Federal Reserve creating credit out of thin air, usually understood to say interest rates should be low because it benefits everybody. Yeah, everybody except the savers. It benefits the spenders, it benefits the people who get the money first. The governments and Wall Street and the banks, they benefit, but by the time the money circulates, the tax falls on the middle class and on the people, and the people end up suffering because they pay higher prices and suffer the consequences. But the excessive credit has been there, and that's the real culprit. But also programs that were well-intended, the Community Reinvestment Act. This was designed to say, well, some people don't quite qualify, but they deserve a house too, and maybe if we put a little force on the bankers to make bad loans, this would really, dribble down and everybody's going to have a house. So the principle that everybody has a right to a house regardless of their income and how responsible they are and whether or not they have a down payment, all of a sudden would produce magic. And it seemed to work because a lot more people had houses. High percentage of people had houses. But guess what? When the crisis came, they were the first one to lose their houses. The banks got bailed out, and the people we were supposed to be helping lost their jobs and lost their houses. So the government program, whether it's with the inflation or whether this affirmative action program of saying you must give people, even if they aren't qualified, to have a loan, this is the setting. This is the reason you end up with bubbles. Then on top of this, we had the corrupt way that credit was allocated through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac should have been the first organizations to go after this bubble broke. But the administrators of Fannie Mac and Freddie Mac are still there. They're still making big salaries, and they got billions of dollars of bailout, and they're still in the business of doing the same thing that caused the housing bubble. So we still have the Fed, we still have this pressure to make certain loans, we still have Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and we have not allowed the liquidation of debt. We have not allowed the banks that overextend themselves to go bankrupt and get the debt written off the books. Instead, the debt has been transferred to us, to the people, and under those circumstances, you can't expect a recovery. And that's why we have to understand basic economic policies. During the decade or so before the housing bubble collapsed in 07 and 08, I had introduced legislation to remove the line of credit to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac had a line of credit to the Treasury. So no matter what they did, they were going to get a bailout. It was a guarantee of a bailout. And I always knew that the Fed would always come to the rescue. So there was the moral hazard that they were too big to fail, and they were going to take risks as long as they were making money, and they did. They kept taking risks. And the tragedy of it, they were right. They got the bailout. And we haven't changed that, and that's what we have to change. We have to change it. So one of the most immediate things that we have to do if we want to correct it is no more bailouts. That's what we have to do. But you know, there have been times in our history where monetary policy precipitated a crisis like this, and the government wasn't attuned to the fact that they had to buy up all the debt. 1920, 21, the debt just dissipated, and people don't even remember the Depression, and it was over in a year. But today it's quite different, so we have to see what we can do to give more incentives. And one is that we could adjust the tax codes. I mean, through the tax codes, we can give tax credit. They've expired for first home buyers. Give them a tax credit. Give them an incentive to get some of their money back. What about adjustment on these mortgages? There's no incentive for the mortgage companies to come and adjust the person that's holding the mortgage because they figure they're going to do better if they hold out because the moral hazard is still there. They figure, oh yeah, we're too big to fail. They'll bail us out again. Nothing has changed. They have no incentive to make a deal with the people that are underwater. So I would say we remove the effort to bail out and they give the people a tax benefit if they do work something out. So if the value of the house goes down, give them some type of a tax credit or tax benefit. And even if it's a lot of money, give it to them over 5 years. And they would have like no taxation for a while in order to get their money back. So this would be a boost, you know, to the effort to wind this down. But as long as the bailout is there, and as long as the banks and the holders of these mortgages believe they're going to get a better deal than making a deal with the people who hold the mortgage, it's not going to occur. The real problem and tragedy is this has been so globalized because our banks have branch banks in Europe, and it's the derivatives market that is so much out of control, and that stuff should be eliminated and wiped off. But we're doing exactly the opposite. Bernanke has been overseas, our Treasury official has been overseas, and we're guaranteeing that we're going to bail out the euro, and we're going to bail out their banks. Their banks are our banks, and those banks are owning Greek debt and Spanish debt, and we're in hock for this. And as long as that is the case, they're going to keep borrowing and borrowing until we bail them out. But how can we bail them out? We've been downgraded once. We're going to get downgraded again. How are we going to bail out the world? So this is why we have to have a sensible approach. We cannot correct this until we admit the truth, that we've spent too much money, we're too much in debt, and we ought to cut some spending, a lot of it. Unfortunately, there's not a serious effort in Washington, there's not a serious effort by any of the candidates to actually cut. The only thing that they've talked about is cutting spending on the proposed increases. They have proposed baseline increases of $9 or $10 trillion over the next 10 years. So they don't act responsibly. There's a super committee that super flopped, and then the automatic cuts are over the next 10 years starting in 2013, so there's no cuts. Nobody can tell Congress what to do in 2013. So why should the markets be reassured that we're going to get our budget in order? It's just not going to happen unless we realize to get out of this mess, we have to rein in the spending. And we have other people proposing, and even the president today had a proposal. He said, oh, it's not a big deal. It costs between $5 and $10 billion, but it's more of the same. You know, more government regulations in there, and they think that the mistakes made by the artificially low interest rates can be taken care of by just more regulations, more Dodd-Frank, more medical legislation, more Obamacare, more Sarbanes-Oxley. These are all regulations that are costing trillions of dollars in order to correct the mistakes of the government. So they make mistakes, oh, we have to correct them, so they have another program of regulations, and we've been doing that. You know, when Enron failed, the Republicans were in charge, and they gave us Sarbanes-Oxley. And that has cost essentially $1 trillion since that time. And Dodd-Frank is estimated to cost $1 trillion. And who knows what Obamacare is going to cost if we don't repeal that. We cannot... We cannot solve our problems by doing more of the same thing that created our problems. We have to have more faith and confidence in what the free market gives us, what sound money is all about, why we ought to live within our means. I have been convinced for decades that if a country is just like an individual, if you live beyond your means and you live on borrowed money, eventually you're going to live beneath your means. And that's where we are today. We're starting to live beneath our means because all we have is debt, and we have no incentive to get our business people to act responsibly again. Matter of fact, a lot of many international businesses, including ours, have a lot of cash, but they're overseas. But we're going to penalize them if they come home. We penalize them with over-regulation and over-taxation. Matter of fact, there's one area where we penalize bringing money back. One way we could solve this problem is just lower the taxes. You know, if they've already paid taxes to a foreign government, just let them bring their money home. Maybe they'll invest it here in this country. One proposal I have made, and I made this 4 years ago, was very popular, and actually I worked behind the scenes in Washington and was not successful. But this is a city that could benefit rather quickly from one little proposal. Make sure that the United States government does not tax tips at all. Just think, I hope that would mean there'd be less paperwork for both the businessman and the person providing the services. No, why, you know, the person making a tip and making a living, I say they're working on the margin. That might be their full-time job, and that might be on the margin. They need every penny. And also, there might be somebody that is a second job. This might be a student. So here we are, we have students struggling. They want to pay their way through college, and we want to encourage them. So we tax their tips, and then they come up short, and then we say, oh, what we need to do is give you a loan and put you further into debt. It makes no sense. So, well... There's another area that could help the city rather quickly, but it would help everybody in this country, and that is we've overreacted to the visitation privileges of foreigners coming to our country. We want people to come to our country. They're rich. They can come here and spend their money here in Las Vegas. That would be a good idea. But we're losing the conferences, not only in this state and this city, but around the country, because TSA doesn't invite people to come in. That scares people away. They get prodded and x-rayed and all these things. But it's hard to get the visas. And we need more resources to have a much more efficient service for visas, as well as our immigration policy. And we could have more resources by saving money elsewhere. I'm not going to vote for anything that's going to add to the debt, but I would... But I would vote for things if we get the money elsewhere. Now, my proposal is that if we say that we need more immigration services and more efficiency there, why don't we save money elsewhere?